study of ancient manuscripts, inscriptions, the material culture and intellectual production of the ancient world, and you see a lot of Professor Cereti's work here, as also an open view to how antiquity has been informing or inspiring over the centuries and is part of contemporary dialects. So I will have Suraj introduce Professor Carlo Cereti, and thanks to all for being here.
So I should now be really more official, but I should say, as you can see, is it working? Yes. Italians, Greeks, and Persians do work well. So Professor Carlo Cereti, of course, is our now endowed Ferdowsi Chair in Zoroastrian Studies, and Professor of Classics and Religions. Before this, since year 2000 until recently, he had been a professor of Iranian Studies at Sapienza University in Rome, Department of Ancient World Studies. From 2009 to 2017, he acted as the cultural counselor at the Embassy of Italy in Tehran, which probably half of the town knew him. His earliest research work focused on the history of the Zoroastrian Parsi community in India, an intellectual interest that continued throughout his academic career. Though in time his main research field shifted to Middle Iranian languages and literature, and more specifically to the study of Zoroastrian literature in Middle Persian. And you could see this by some of the books that I had of him in front. His interest in medieval and modern history of the Zoroastrian community, combined with an intimate knowledge of Zoroastrian Middle Persian literature and more of Sasanian and post-Sasanian written culture, led him to preparing a critical edition of the Middle Persian text that is the Zand Bahman Yazd, which I think was done in 1995, was published in 1995, and many chapters of the Bundahishan, a Zoroastrian encyclopedic work, as well as a work of synthesis on the Pahlavi tradition. That is the purple book right there, the second one, Literatura Pahlavi. From 2006 onwards, he has intensively worked on epigraphic Middle Persian with a focus on the great inscription of Narse Spaikuli, which is in northern Iraqi Kurdistan, and other epigraphic texts, including seals and sealings, as well as ostraca and documents mainly dating to the late Sasanian and early Islamic period. He is the head of the Paikuli project in the KRG region of Iraq and of the newly created Kuwait Bay project in Kuwait. So he has his hands in many things, and we're hoping that our graduate students get to go to many places. He also acts as a senior advisor to the Kermanshah Sasanian Landscape Project in Iran. In the past, he has contributed to a number of projects, and I'm not going to read all of these texts of he has his hands in many, many projects. And what I think stands out for me, at least for Professor Cereti, is not only his numerous publications, articles, many, many more, but I should say his humanity. The way that he's able also to traverse very difficult places and sometimes difficult people, and that I feel that he's as much an Iranian as an Italian, as a Zoroastrian. He is really a great colleague to have, and I say this because I've known him for too many. So having said that, I think Professor Cereti is going to begin his lecture on Zoroaster's biography in the Iranian tradition. Please.
So, first of all, thank you for taking your time to come here. And sorry for the delay, which made me feel very much at home, because this is what happens at every conference in Italy, so I appreciate the effort. And yes, first of all, is for me to thank Raj, who is, I would say, the main reason that led me to, well, first of all, to answer to the call at the time because of our friendship, but also other colleagues, Nasreen, Susan, Andromache, who made it easier for me to come here. Persons like Brian, like Richard, who took some of their summertime off to show me restaurants or beaches. And I must say, I mean, Turaj critically chose a hotel close to the beach so that not I, that do not decide, but Tiziana will decide in favor of California. So, and I mean, and the doctoral students and everybody, I mean, really thank you for, let's say, making it possible for me to open a new chapter in my life, which I hope will be as interesting as other chapters have been up to now. And of course, I mean, my main thanks and my most important thanks goes to Dr. Nasi, who made the physician all possible, and to the and to UCI, who decided that I was taken into consideration. I must say one of the reasons that really convinced me to come is the fact that in California you have a sizable Iranian community, and I mean, having left Iran now a long time ago and being it more difficult to get visas in this new period, I really appreciate it, and also the fact that there is a Zoroaster community, which gives really a complete different dimension to my work, to the way I can go about it. So, this first lecture, which will, unfortunately, I won't say I'm going to be short, but I'm going to be long. So this long first lecture that I am going to give is on Zoroaster's biography. When discussing the title, I thought about calling it straight out hagiography, because I consider it to be a product of late antiquity and the early Middle Ages that can be compared to many other and similar stories about prophets, saints, and so on that were common in Western Asia and in the Mediterranean in that period. I'm going to talk mainly of two books, the seventh book of the Denka and the Zarathustra. They are not books that, I mean, there are great differences between the two. And of course, in my way of saying things, the seventh book of the Denka is more important. So I will speak more of the seventh book than of the Zarathustra. But it's important that both are there. And of course, these are not the only books talking about Zoroaster. There are a lot of books talking about Zoroaster in Middle Persian literature, in the New Persian literature of the Zoroastrians, but these are, to my mind, the most complete ones. So what is the Denkart? The Denkart, which can be translated very simply as Acts of the Religion, is a book that was written between the 9th and 10th century of our era, and it was written in Middle Persian. One could discuss what Middle Persian means, and one could discuss about the unity of Middle Iranian languages, which, according to Henning, basically depended on the use of one and the same alphabet, more than on a common linguistic stage of evolution. The Denkart is one of the most important and relevant books in Zoroastrian literature, and it is important and relevant because of its sheer size. I mean, it counts, I mean, the parts that have gone come down to us, which is not the entire text, it counts 169,000 words out of a total of less than 700,000 words for the entire, what we call literature. That means 700,000 words is not a huge amount. It is also important because it is thought as being a summa, a resume of all what was known about the religion in the early stages of the Islamic era. It is a book that derives from the Zand of the Avesta. That is, it derives from the commentary, from the exegesis of the holy Zoroastrian text. And exegesis, I mean, talking in priestly terms, means also to actualize a text and try to make it fit in with the reality of the age in which you are acting. You have two different redactions of the Denka, one by Adurfarbai Farrokhzadan and one by Adurbadi Imedan. And in fact, there's one chapter at the end of the third chapter of the third book of the Denka that says, written by Adurbadi Imedan, that says, I went into my grandfather's office, Adurbadi Farrokhzadan, and found it in a mess, maybe a mess deriving from the conversion of the Zoroastrian high priest to Islam, and I patched up all the material that I could find. So we don't really know what can be assigned to one or the other author. But in my opinion, which differs from Maria Masuk's and from that of other people, the book 7 was written in the form that we have it by the second author, which means 10th century, and a shorter book containing a biography of Zoroaster, book 5, was written by the previous author. So, they are all part of the last 3 books of the Denka that are basically exegetical and not apologetic as other books. And let's say they are meant to expound and explain what was known about the Avesta. It is interesting that in explaining what was known about the Avesta, one would start from Zoroaster. One book dedicated to Zoroaster, and then one book dedicated to summing up the Sasanian Avesta, whatever it was, 21 masks, and so on. And then one book dedicated to a more detailed commentary of the Gathas, a more detailed resume of the 3 commentaries on the Gathas, one of which has been recently published by Zoroaster, who started off from UCI, Vevina, that has published 2 enormous books on them. Of course, why would Zoroastrians write so much in the 9th and 10th century? Maybe because they were trying to be considered as dhimmi, that is, people of the book, which was not clear under early Islam. There were debates. Some would say the Zoroastrians had a book, some would say they did not. Some would understand people of the book as people coming, sharing the same book, that is the Torah, and others would interpret it in a wider way. So there was also a need by the community. The other book, the Zarathushnaman. We are in a different situation, much later, in 600 well, the definitive copy is from 647 of Yezdegerd, which means either 1278 or 1308, depending whether you count from 621 or from 651. And in 647, Zardosht ibn Baharam ibn Pashdu copied a manuscript that had earlier been written by Kakaus ibn Khosrow ibn Dara, as shown in his dissertation by Dan Sheffield from Principle. It is a narrative that says, I am turning an earlier Middle Persian text into New Persian because to make it better understandable to the community, which would show that in the 13th century, the Zoroastrian, at least the lay people, would read their language in the Arabic alphabet. I mean, this is something that one should really focus on. In the early Islamic centuries, Persian continued to be written. In the north, until the 10th century, 11th century, at the beginning of the 11th centuries, where we have the inscription of Mir Radikan, it continued to be written in Pahlavi. And it was not a question of being a Zoroastrian or a Muslim. You used Persian in the north of Iran to write, you used Pahlavi alphabet to write Persian, to write your own language. And this is attested in the Biography. So, now, we have the two books I'm going to talk about. Let us take one step back. Who is the Zoroaster? I mean, it's easy to say. Zoroaster, the prophet of ancient Iran, and so on. Very well, but this is a very, now it is fashionable to say it's a very colonialist way of looking at things. I mean, a prophet is a specific professional figure that is active in specific religions, which are mainly the religion that come from the Judaic tradition, Semitic religions, to use. So to say that Zoroaster was a prophet means to apply the model that comes from a Semitic religion to a very different religion, to an Indo-European, Indo-Iranian religion that had different standards. So in the Gathas, the earlier texts, the ones that are assigned to Zoroaster himself, what does Zoroaster say of himself? He says, I am a mantran and I am a zautar. A mantran means a specialist of the mantras, which are known to anyone who knows a bit of Indian tradition, that are specialists of the holy words. I am a reciter. And then he is also a zautar, someone, a zot, someone that performs the ritual. So he's saying, I am basically a professional priest who knows recitation, who knows his text, and who knows his ritual. We will see how important this is in some of the later interpretations. Then, in the younger Avesta, it is said, he says, I am an Ashawan. I am someone upholding the whatever Asha is. I mean, is Asha the truth? I mean, is it something moral, ethical? Or is Asha, as for example, Jean Kellens would want, is Asha simply the ritual correctness? Is it Urta, the Indian Urta of the Vedas, the law that governs the world? But I mean, I tend to think that Zoroaster, that in the Young Avesta it was intended ethically, because the Ashawan fights against the Drugvan, the followers of the upholders of the lie. And you find the same fight against the Drugvans in the inscriptions, for example, of Darius and Pisutun. You find them in Sasanian inscription. The king fights against the lie, the great lie. This kind of religion was deeply already in the Young Avesta. So already in what I would date somewhere around 6th century BC, 5th century, 7th century. I mean, there's no possibility to pinpoint it down. it was linked with Zoroaster. So in the Frawarane, that is in the most, in the Zoroastrian credo, in the Zoroastrian profession of religion, it is said that the believer proclaims himself to be Mazdayasno, a worshipper of Mazda, and Zarathustrish, a follower of Zoroaster. Which also means, since in such prayers, I mean, you say things that are very precise, you don't add words. I mean, if you think at the Christian tradition, when the Catholic Church added one word, filioque, I mean, there was a schism that devastated the West. So be careful in what you write in credos. If you say, I am Mazdian and Zoroastrian, it means that there were Mazdians that were not Zoroastrians. So it is a way to specify, and this is over. The thing didn't really work out. The 3 lines above should have been in Avesta. But it's not, it didn't really work out. But the meaning of Yasna 12:1, I profess myself a worshipper of Mazda, a follower of Zoroaster, rejecting the Devas, accepting the holy doctrine, one who praises the Amishaspendas, and so on. Now, what do we know about Zoroaster? You see here a number of Greek sources, more or less 5th, 4th century BC, all saying 2 different things. Zoroaster existed 6,000 years about present day. Xerxes, Plato, or whoever. But I mean, the time that is in our memory. Or else, 5,000 years before the Trojan War, I suppose one says in English. Which means 6,000 years before present day, basically. And then there's one source, Aristophanes, that says, no, wait, he was the master of Pythagoras. So he lived in the 6th century BCE. This would lead to some confusion, except, but I will get to that in one second. Then you have a tradition, this time Iranian, in the Bundahish, 258 years before Zoroaster. Again, 6th century, more or less. From, 258 years before Alexander. Again, more or less 6th century BCE, and so on. When of Alexander, maybe his Acme. When of Zoroaster, maybe his 40th year, when he went to visit, to speak, to converse with Zoroaster. This led to a number of different interpretations. Mary Boyce, in love with the Zoroastrian community, who lived there, spent 1 year, and then dedicated her life, her inheritance, everything to Zoroastrianism, says, okay, Zoroastrianism is the most ancient of religion. And Zoroaster must have lived somewhere in the late Bronze Age. Of course, this was enthusiastically accepted by many Zoroastrians and by many Iranians, but said, our prophet is the oldest of prophets, and our religion is the most influential of religions. But this position opened the door to the 3rd position. Because once you cancel Zoroaster from history, once you have no information on the man, people like Mariam Mollet, in a beautiful, in an epoch-making book from 1963, were able to say, look, it's not really a prophet. It is a person who has Orpheus, a symbol like Orpheus, like Dionysus. It is a focus around which different traditions can come together. So there was no historic Zoroaster. Mariam Mollet never said, there is no historic Zoroaster. He just said, I will analyze the Zoroastrian text we will talk about, in short, from the point of view of structuralism. So Zoroaster's biography is basically a narration, a representation, a symbolic representation, a narrative representation of ritual. So the miracles and the way his anthropology and everything are just a representation of ritual. This opens the way to saying there is no Zoroaster. But Mollet never did say it. In fact, Mollet discussed his PhD, a huge thing, and then committed suicide. So maybe he would have said it later, but he did not. Other persons, Jean Hélène, Octo Scervo, Cantera, most of the people working on Zoroastrianism today brought this to the extreme, saying there was no Zoroaster. Basically, the Avesta was nothing else but an ethnic poetry, similar to what happened in Greece with the Odyssey, the Iliad, and so on, which is discussed. And I will not go into the details. Other scholars, Walter Bruno Henning, Ilya Gershevich, and Gerard Rognoli, said, wait, but there is historical evidence. And you can explain away the different dating, 6000 BCE, and more or less present day. I mean, 6000 before Plato or present day. You can explain it if you have in your mind the chronology, the world chronology of the Zoroastrians. According to the ancient Iranian world chronology, which was close to the Indian one, you would, the Fravashis, the immortal souls of the men, came into existence in year 3000 of the world chronology. And in year 3000, Ormazd asked them, including Zoroaster's Fravashi, they asked them, are you ready to go in the world and fight for me? So they were created. This is basically the model on which, in one, I think it's a tafsir, in one Islamic tafsir, there is the idea that all, at the beginning of time, Allah took all mankind from the spine and asked them, will you believe in me? So, so if that is the idea, the soul was created 6,000 years ago. And Zoroaster's soul was created 6,000 years ago. But Zoroaster himself lived in 600 BCE. And then, I mean, Vignoli, I quote him often because I've studied with him, so. In a series of conferences, in the Yashater conferences, delivered at UCLA, at the end said 618, 540. But I am making this thing too long. So this was the introduction. I'm sorry. I'll try to make up. Let's look at the books themselves. This is a scene from the Vatican Museum. It is the School of Athens and Raphael's representation of Zoroaster. Zoroaster as an astrologer, a person who held in his hand the cosmos. We are back. I will not discuss on this too much. So, when you look at Denkat 7 locates Zoroaster halfway between Gaiomar, the first man born in year 6000 of the Zoroastrian chronology, and Soshans, the last man, the future savior, born in year 11,970. So halfway in the history of mankind. This is present in the 7th book of the Denkat. It is not present in the Zarathrushnama. The Zarathrushnama does not talk anymore of what happened before. These books have been published many times by Mollet himself in an appendix to their PhD, so the students who are preparing PhDs, they should calculate to write at least 1,000 pages and leave a few so that after their death the professor can publish them in their name, of course, but I mean, except for this small detail, but he published and translated, then got 7, then got 5, the Pahlavi Rivayat and so on. He was not the one to do so. Before Mollet, a huge intellectual, Edward William West, who was an engineer in the East India Company, who translated everything from Middle Persian. And as it goes, normally engineers are very precise in what they do and translate, and he did a wonderful job for his time. He also added a different book, The Selections of Satskram, Izidalgiai Satskram. You have translations in Persian and in French by Gignoux and Tafazoli and so on, which is extremely important. But what is more important, we have a fragment in the Zoroastrian Middle Persian translation of a different tradition. Not anymore a priestly tradition, but an epic or kingly tradition, the Ayatgari Zaderan. The Ayatgari Zaderan narrates one episode of the Battle of Fez between Vishtasp and the king of the Hyons, the Hunas, and is very similar to what we find, what we suspect that one would find in the Huadai Namag, in the pre-Islamic Book of the Laws, and then what one finds in the book of Vishtasp, of Bushtasp, in the Shahnameh itself. In a book that contains the 1,000 and some baits written by Dapiri. So in the most ancient part of the Shahnameh. How can you interpret this? I mean, I've already taken a lot of your time, I will not take much more, but the two extreme interpretations of the narrations about Zoroaster are those by Abraham Williams Jackson, 1899, American scholar, who considered Zoroaster to be a prophet of the Semitic type, and who tried to reconstruct his biography. And there's an extreme, the books that we have, the author that we have mentioned more than once, Mariam Mollet, who interpreted it from a structuralist point of view. It is not important, it is a symbolic biography. It only represents the sacrifice. The truth, at least, no, I'm sorry about the truth, what I think is the truth, was first somehow guessed by Henrik Samuel Newbery, another great scholar of Iranian studies, a great scholar that I should not even mention, because I mean I have studied with two persons. One was Gerard Dognoli, and the other was David Neil Mackenzie, and David Neil Mackenzie was a bit ill-tempered. I sat at his feet for long years in Göttingen, and I smoked a huge number of cigarettes in his backyard because he would kick me out of the house every time. But when I did something really wrong, I mistranslated something, or I got wild ideas, he looked at me and said, either you will be like Newbery, or you will be like Gignoux. And since Newbery was professor in Uppsala and Gignoux was professor at the École Pratique, I sort of took it as a compliment, and I could live with it, but still, it was not meant as a compliment. Anyhow, Newbery, in a seldom quoted seminal paper, which was basically pronounced in a conference and published only many years afterwards, said, look, if you look at the seventh book, you understand that it can only be a product of a very specific period in Iranian history, that is the Sasanian period, and he thought that it was to be assigned to the long reign of Shaul II, who reigned most of the 4th century, who was one of the great Sasanian kings, who was the Sasanian king known to be very close to the Zoroastrian church, and who was a Sasanian king to whom some have also assigned the reduction, the writing down of the Avesta. This book, this Denkat 7, was based on 2 nasks of the Avesta Cirdad and the Spanda nask, and often it was pseudo-epigraphal in that it really signaled. It said, Chion den goet, as it is said in the Holy Scriptures. Chion as den paidat, as it is revealed in the Holy Scriptures, and so on. Jean de Ménage thought that even though it had all those quotes, it was an original composition. So what does the Denkat speak about? It speaks basically about the miracles of the greatest apostles of the Mazdian religion. And before speaking about these miracles and his life, it speaks about the history of the prophets who had preceded him. So it has 1 chapter on the 3,000 years before his Zoroaster birth, 4 on the prophet's life, 1 on the events that took place after the death of Zoroaster, but still during Vishta's timeline, 1 other on the historical events up to the end of the Sasanian period. And this is very important. I mean, there was a focus on the last centuries of the Sasanian Empire, and then 4 eschatological chapters, including 1 that spoke specifically of what happened in the early centuries of Islam. The first post-Zoroastrian, post-Vishtaspian, post-Sasanian chapter. And these reveal a lot about what was happening. If you look at the construction of the Zarathushna, as I have said, and I will not reread this, it was different. It had nothing about the centuries before or what happened before Zoroaster. And the final part was only a rewording, a re-narration taken from another text, the Zandi Bahmaniyat, which is the main apocalyptical narration that we have. So, I mean, we have a tripartition of time. Remember that Zoroastrianism is a religion of the 3 times and of the 2 essences in a way. Geti, Menon, good, bad. The original separation between good and bad. The present eschatological fight and the future and final separation. This way of looking at things was present in the Denka, was lost in the Zarathustra Nama, which means that between the 10th and the 13th century, some dramatic changes happened. And of course, I mean, did they really happen, or was it just the outwardly way in which Zoroastrians communicated? I mean, it was different to write in Middle Persian that Muslims could not read, and to write using the Arabic alphabet that Persian Muslims could understand. So the Denkat responded to the challenge posed by the growing popularity of Christian saints' life, and possibly even to the spread of early Islamic biographies of Muhammad. The Sirah was completed between the end of the 8th and the beginning of the 9th century, maintaining a substantial coherence with ancient Zoroastrian doctrine about time. In the Zarathustra, this was finally lost, and the model was more closely that of Muslim medieval holy men, or of Christian hagiographies common, for example, in Syriac literature. A lot of Syriac literature was written, dates from the 7th century. So that is more or less the period. This I just wanted to show you a beautiful statue of Zurvan or Ahriman, whatever you like, taken from a Mithraeum in Rome. Not only that, the Zarathustra separates Zoroaster's biography from what comes later and introduce what comes later by saying Nekobe Shinao in Keseyar Jomand, Zeguftarion Mobede Oshmand, Biavarda Zando Vastabidar, Zeguftari Dadar Piruskar, Nebeshtam Man Inra Belaf Sedari, Kitobo Shad Azan, Shutu Dilegari. So it states, look, I am dividing the two books, and also I am explaining all this in Persian, so that you may still be on board. I will leave out Denkard 5 because it's really late. Can we say something more about the date? We have, let's say, two, let's call them adjectives, attributes that work, that help us in this direction. Kevishtasp, so the protector, the sponsor of Zoroaster, is defined, carries the title Ram Shah, which basically may mean king of peace or peaceful king, but which is also probably a lectio facilior, an easier reading of a title that really existed in the Middle Sasanian period, that is Ram Shah, a possessive compound, meaning the king who has a kingdom in peace, which is built on the Ram Shah. And this Ram Shah is attested for Kevishtasp in another book that we have quoted, the Ayat Gali Zareran. So we know that we have a date, post-Quen at least, in the first half of the 5th century, between Yazdegerd I and Yazdegerd II. The two kings, I mean, the extremes of a period in which kings carried the name of the title of Ramshar. I mean, the entire thing was Mazdesna by Ramshar K so and so, showing that the king was Mazdesna, Mazdayasnan, was a lord by, carried the title of Kai, K, which is the title that we later find in the Shahnameh, and that we earlier found in the Western literature and so on. So 5th century is probably the post-Quen date. Then if you look, and probably when looking at this text, you should imagine not the text written in one period and then fossilized, but it's a work, I mean, the text was narrated, rewritten, recopied, things were added to it, it was made up to date, and so on. If you look at chapter 7 of the 7th book of the Denkard, you find mentioned Vahman Ispandiadan, and Vahman Ispandiadan is normally identified with the Achaemenid period. Then you have Alexander, why not? Which of course in the Zoroastrian tradition is the damned Alexander and not the wise Alexander of the Islamic tradition that derives from, of course, from Greek and Hellenistic models. Then you have Ardashiri Babayan, the founder of the Sasanian period. Then you have the Mazdak and the followers of Mazdak, the Mazdakites, and then finally Khosrow Kabadan. Seventh chapter. Why this? Because, in my idea, because one redaction was under Khosrow Kabadan, and it was under Khosrow Kabadan because the thing that really shocked Zoroastrians, and not only Zoroastrians, Sasanian periods, was the Mazdakite movement. I mean, the Mazdakite movement introduced administrative reform, quadripartition of the empire on the model of the Roman Empire. It moved nobility. I mean, Khosrow created a nobility at court to control them better. The Mazdakite period passed in history as being the first example of communism, and in fact, if you look at the descriptions, even without reading it, but if you look at the description of, let's say, family relations as seen by the Zoroastrians, it was a description of women in common, children that had no fathers, no lineage, and so on, which all was fixed by Khosrow of Immortal Soul. And I mean, on the title of Immortal Soul, we could speak, but we will speak another time. So you see that there was a layer of tradition that goes back to this period and to the great shock that Mazdakism brought to the Sasanian Empire with the clergymen seeing it as a beginning of the end of days. So, and finally, we get to the end. The division of human history in three great periods. The 3,000 years from Gaiomar to Zoroaster's conversation with Ormazd, and the 3,000 years that divide Zoroaster's from the final renovation the division of human history in two great periods. The 3,000 years from Gaiomar to Ormazd's conversation with Ormazd, and the 3,000 years that divide Zoroaster from the final renovation operated by the future Soshans are essential to the narration of Denker 7, which divides Zoroaster's legend in three great periods: before Zoroaster, the life of Zoroaster, and events that take place after the prophet's death. So this is part of the religion of the three times of the two essences. This centrality is lost in the Zarathustra. Between the 10th and the 13th century, something very radically changed in the community. And the community started accepting Islamic literary models. And of course, I mean, it also meant that in these centuries, in the 13th century, we had in Iran Mongol invasions that devastated the country, decimated the Zoroastrian community. Moreover, evidence points toward a relative late date for the creation of Zoroaster's legend, in the form attested at its fullest in Denker 7. The title borne by Zoroaster's royal mentor, Ramshah, is similar to one of the official titles used by Sasanian kings of the 5th century. Denker 7.7 preserves the memory of two great Sasanian kings, the founder of the dynasty and Khosrow, son of Galai, Zefine Anushirvan, which basically means of the blessed soul, which basically means death. So I mean, just as noted above, the passage of the Mazdakite movement is quite realistic and may well derive from an official chronicle, while the episodes told in Denkard 7.8 may well refer to events belonging to the years of the decline and fall of the empire, or more probably to the early Islamic period, but are narrated in a very different style. So, once again, these passages could be of use in the debate about the existence of a royal Quadainamag, of all the debate on what Jaakko Hammen Antilla has written about the Quadainamag, what was the Quadainamag, and possibly how many Quadainamags were there. I mean, what should we intend for Quadainamag? And finally, and therefore, one may hypothetically date the primary arrangement of Zoroaster's legendary life, as found in the 7th book of the Denkard, to the late Sasanian period, surely after Yazdegerd I, and probably under Khosrow I, or soon after. The part dealing with the future trials undergone by the followers of the good religion, Wedern, at the end of Zoroaster's millennium, was then to be revised, adding events that followed upon the fall of the Sasanian Empire and the rise of a new religion, Islam. In my opinion, this would require a lot more discussion. Probably the real beginning of apocalyptic, of the last part of apocalyptic text was the last great war of antiquity, Heraclius against Khosrow II. And this also corresponds to similar movements that took place in Byzantium, to a similar apocalyptic or millenaristic literature that was also in Byzantium. And finally, the Zarathush-Nama is witness to a subsequent period of Zoroastrian cultural history when the community had interiorized Islamic literary motives and models. That is the period that then went on till pre-modernity, till the time that the Hadaria and the Parsi community turned to Iran, strong of its newly found wealth, the Parsi community, not Iran, and once again changed the self-perception of the Iranian Zoroastrian. So, thank you.